Welcome everyone to this episode of ETCISO TV. Now, everyone knows that the power sector has been one of the most embattled by cyber attacks and among the prime targets for nation state actors. And why not? Because one cyber attack can cause immense damage. Now, this sector is also, it's so critical that it has the responsibility to quickly respond to the threats with the right controls in place, and time is absolutely critical. Now, there have been several incidents of high profile attacks on the power infrastructure, including the very infamous attack in 2015 when hackers got into the system of a Western Ukrainian power company, cutting power to 225,000 households. And more recently, closer home, cyber attacks by Red Echo, the actor group with China links on India's power sector, have been very widespread than previously known. Reportedly, 10 Indian power sector assets came under the attack. Now, keeping all this in mind, the Central Electricity Authority has framed guidelines on cybersecurity in power sector to be adhered to by all the power sector utilities to create a cyber secure ecosystem. And it is the first time a comprehensive guideline has been formulated on cybersecurity in the power sector. So to talk more about these guidelines and how they're going to impact cybersecurity on the sector, I have with me Mr. Murali Rao, Cybersecurity Leader, EY India. As a cybersecurity leader of EY in India, Murali plays an instrumental role in strengthening the firm's cybersecurity footprint across the region. So welcome, Murali. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Shipra. My pleasure, and very topical subject for the day. Probably one of the most exciting things that has happened to the cybersecurity sector in the recent past. So pleasure to be talking to you.
Great, thanks. So let me get started with, before we get into what this new framework or the new policy is about, let me just start with how do you see the whole trend, of cyber attacks on the power sector shaping up? Are you seeing a particular pattern in the cyber threats and vulnerabilities that are impacting the power sector?
It's actually a no-brainer, because if you actually look at the power sector, it's probably one of the few sectors, or probably one of the key sectors, which is probably going to have a devastating impact, if at all, if it was under any kind of stress from non-state actors or bad actors, across the globe. So there are nation-state actors seeking to cause economic disruption, and there might be enemy states who are trying to go and try and use the power sector to actually cause physical and environmental damage, because of the way because of the expanse of the power grid in India. So cyber criminals today understand the economic value and the economic impact that they can potentially cause, to not only the government of the day, not only to the nation, but also to the citizens of India. So it's absolutely critical that the power sector is definitely one of the most important critical infrastructures of the country. So it's just think about the geographical presence of the power sector. It stretches through the entire expanse and the breadth and length of the country, and that is one thing which connects the entire citizens to the government and to the entire nation, right? So it is definitely one of the key targets for any non-state actors or bad actors to actually go behind, in the world, especially given the kind of automation that is coming into the power sectors, and with smart meters and with the changes in the RTUs, and a lot of vulnerabilities might creep in. And the vulnerabilities will spread across IT as well as the OT side of the sector, right from transmission, distribution, all the way to, even from power generation to transmission to distribution. So essentially, it is not only the grid which is essentially going to get affected, but the impact of that is going to get felt by the citizens of the country. So the impact is beyond IT and runs into OT as well. And there are many, many threat actors, in the world today active. So whether you can draw parallels to the Ukrainian attack that you mentioned, and a few attacks that even that has happened in India, but which still have not been ascribed to cyber attacks. But there are telltale signs of, the power sector being under a tremendous amount of stress. So if there was one change that was required in the power sector, that is this guideline. This was long awaited, and it's such a welcome measure that the CEA has brought out, to ensure that there is the domain of cyber is not only about security, but also about safety, but also to ensure the resilience of the grid itself as such. If you, because today there is more and more exploits that are happening digitally as well as through the edge, which is the smart meters, the RTUs, the PLCs, which are exposed on the distribution end of it. Not to mention what could potentially go wrong on the transmission and generation side of the business as well. So it's right up there, Shipra.
Yes, so there have been a lot of cyber incidents in India's power sector being reported, like you said, rightly said. So they may not have been ascribed to as cyber attacks, but there have been a lot of cyber incidents, and the number and the volumes of such incidents is only increasing. But are you seeing any pattern in terms of the kind of malware or like we started there was Stuxnet. There were a lot of attacks, which were attributed to Stuxnet. But are we seeing any new malware or any new kind of threats which are emerging in this sector?
See, what we have observed in the marketplace is that there are definitely malwares which are out there, but there is no particular pattern to that. The reason why, it's a very interesting question, because the reason as to why you're not able to observe a pattern is because of the absence of logs and actually information which will help you decipher, which will help you connect things and actually be able to ascribe it to different groups or different people, different kinds of actors in the in the cyber crime world, right? So one of the things that needs to improve for for a pattern to emerge and for us to be able to bring on some amount of predictability to which malware group is actually going to be active or which is active, you need to first of all be able to actually get the information out from the systems and actually analyze it properly. So one of the issues that plague in this particular sector is because of the lack of proactive monitoring. You don't know what you don't know here in this power sector. I mean, I hopefully it is not that bad, but over a period of time when we do the business, we know that there is no demand for a monitoring system to be put in place for any of the subsidiaries or any of the entities of either a power grid or anybody, the BESCOMs, the DISCOMs of the world. There is actually no demand which has come to date. So it is safe for you and me, Shipra, for us to actually presume that the lack of information is lack of knowledge, and lack of knowledge is lack of wisdom, and hence it's actually very tough for us to say that these are the actors who are present in India. But if you actually look across the world, yes, there are definitely groups beyond the Stuxnets of the world. You can always also look at the kind of history that Israel and Iran have had in terms of both the power as well as the nuclear power sectors, how they have been at it for quite a bit of time. So there are many such instances of attacks and patterns that are happening out there in the world. But in India, we are yet to decipher that, just because, as I said, lack of knowledge is, lack of information is lack of knowledge, and we can keep going on about it. But the familiarity of the grids, the Indian grids are not going to be so very different from the other grids in the world, and the vulnerabilities are not going to be very different from what is happening out there in the US or in the UK, because at the end of the day, you consume, I mean, you are utilizing the same kind of stuff that an ABB or a Rockwell or a Siemens or somebody else is bringing to the table, because the OT is full of these guys, these OEMs, right? So the vulnerabilities that exist out there in the world are the same that exist here in this part of the world as well. But what needs to be improved and what needs to be focused upon is the fact that we do have these vulnerabilities, but we are not doing anything about it because we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what's amiss at this particular point of time. So while it's a long-winded answer without any output, but the problem statement is that we are blissfully unaware of what's happening. It falls into the fourth quartile of the knowledge quartile. I don't even know what I don't know, right? So that's where we are. But things can only move up with this policy from this point of time, Shipra.
So that's what I was coming to. So do these cybersecurity guidelines actually address some of these issues that you pointed out, and a very honest assessment as an expert? What is your honest assessment of these guidelines? Where any areas, gap areas where they lack and where they address the issues well?
See, in my career, Shipra, I have been associated with NERC for almost the last 10 to 12 years, or even probably even more. I have delivered several consulting engagements around NERC. Now, so the domain is no different. I mean, what needs to be done is no secret as such. The policy as such, the CA guidelines that have come out, right now, they are actually well crafted. Whoever CA has worked with has actually done a good job. They have taken the best inputs from various different, guidelines across the world. So we have a best of everything sort of a guideline, which is definitely going to make a huge difference in the marketplace. They have covered the wide ground, and whether there are around 14 articles in the policy, as you would have seen. So whether it is about the fact that getting your basics right, from the fact that you need to identify what you need to monitor, you need to identify what you need to secure, right? So which means that you need to identify what's a cyber asset as such, and how do you figure out something as a cyber asset? How do you write a policy around that? So that they have linked it back to NCIIPC guidelines. We need to take the guidelines from them. Then there is a demand, guidelines demands that you actually set out a crisis management policy. They call it the CCCMP policy, which needs to be based on a model which the sector would evolve. There are multiple sectors that these guys have, that the policy has declared, and the organization belonging to that particular sector will need to follow that model CCMP policy. And there are specific callouts around how to manage hazards, how to identify the cyber asset, and how to protect the cyber asset, what needs to be monitored, how do you respond to an incident, what is the guideline around response to an incident. So it's actually a well crafted policy. There are a few things that we can definitely talk about, what else can be done to improve this. But in my opinion, having seen NERC to the to various different guidelines, even in the oil and gas sector to the financial services sector, this is definitely right up there, well qualified and well articulated. Out of the box, you wouldn't want to just criticize it for the heck of it, because I don't think there is much of things left out here on what should be an ideal policy, what should be an ideal framework for you to be thinking about cybersecurity or cyber defense or cyber safety of the power sector. So that is very much in place, and there are references to international standards, which there is some amount of prescriptiveness in the policy, especially around the fact that any uh, OT system that is going to get into place There is the policy specifically talks about the fact that they need to be 62443 IEC 62443-4 certified, and that certification is not a one-time thing, and the onus should rest on the OEM, and that demand should get into the procurement policy itself, which is a very, very welcome guidance from this policy, because that is getting secure by design. That is getting secure by design. If you have a system which is already compliant to 62443-2-3-4, then half your issues are solved. And the policy also calls out the fact that you need to test these systems twice a year. Okay, which is again a very welcome thing, because any system under the stress of that particular environment will be vulnerable. So you test that. Now, the challenge is that there is one more very, very nice feature in this policy, which is not there in the other NERCSIPs or wherever, which is about replacement of the legacy systems, which is absolutely critical. If you have to think about cybersecurity, this policy by design is calling out the fact that the onus is on the CISO to actually identify what is a legacy system, have a risk management plan in place, get it signed off with the board, go to the board and actually tell them that these are the legacy systems that needs to be replaced, so that you keep the systems in line with the development of the cyberspace, the IT space, and the OT space, which is a very, very welcome guidance, which actually is one step ahead of let's say the lack of it in the NERCSIPs and the other policies out there in the world. So which is very welcome. So cybersecurity is a function of visibility, Shipra. You and me can secure only what we see, what we hear, what we know, what we can feel. If you don't even know that, then you have a problem. So the first step is that I know that I have legacy systems that I need to deal with, which is a very, very welcome thing in this particular policy. So well-crafted one, Shipra. We can nitpick. We can nitpick. One of the things that we could definitely nitpick is, the fact that this is one of those sectors which hits the consumers, people like you and me who consume the power in this thing. And if you have observed, at least in Bangalore, and I have seen it in a couple of other cities, there is a huge amount of money being spent on taking the cables from overhead to making them underground. There is a lot of money that the power sector is actually spending on making it. So which essentially means you're drawing the cables underground, but you're also going to be implanting a lot of RTUs, which are new. There is going to be smart, almost every house, at least in the major cities, are all smart meters. I think the smart meter rollout is a huge success. So which means they are smart. Then you have RTUs, which are which are public, which are going to be available in public places. So managing a disaster is a critical element of the safety of the grid, because anything that happens on the edge or on the RTUs or on the PLCs is a potential health, safety, and environmental and a life related disaster. It can impact lives. We can take away people's lives. So while the crisis management plan and the sabotage, there is a particular article around, how to handle sabotage. Okay. While it is there, I feel that there is a link missing here when it comes to calling out specific guidances around cyber safety management. You can argue and say that it's a part of the CCMP plan, but probably that 1 yard, couple of yards would have been great. But I think that's to be fair, very well drafted. Probably there can be an amendment that can come through and add a couple of more articles around this. So we should give credit where it is due. And I myself have done so many consulting engagements around the power sector, the oil and gas sector, and all that. So, well, good job done here, at least for India.
Yeah, very well balanced view on that. But a lot of times what we see is that there is where things fall apart is when they move from policy to execution. That is where a lot of things actually
Yeah.
tend to go wrong. So, what would you suggest as the next step for organizations, for the power sector organization, and what preparations do they need to have in place in order to enforce these guidelines? And a lot will fall on the CISO. So what preparations should they have in order to ensure that these guidelines are enforced effectively?
Yeah, absolutely right. The toughest bit of it is the operationalization of these guidelines. So one of the worries that comes to me is that does the power sector actually have the skills and competence of a CISO? Is there anybody in the power sector with the designation and with the skills and competencies that is required to fulfill the CISO role? Because the CISO is the man on whom everything is based on here. He's a very empowered character. He's a very empowered actor. Let's call him an actor, according to this particular policy. Now, number one, the entire cybersecurity industry is reeling with a lack of availability of good talent. Number one, the power sector themselves should be hiring hundreds of CISOs. Okay, so the problem that we have is, do we have that talent? Do we have that knowledge? And even if you have the talent, or if you bring in outside talent, it's very tough for you to get the knowledge of power sector into a typical CISO, who is available in the market. So the problem starts right from there. And the second thing is the awareness or the lack of it, in the existing ecosystem around an empathy to the cyberspace. Okay, about cybersecurity, about cyber safety, about cyber resilience. That awareness is what needs to be built out. Probably that's one more thing which should have come out very strongly in this particular guidance, because unless and until that happens, cybersecurity is a function of how well the ecosystem works together, as well as much as it is about visibility. How do you get more visibility? Only when people around you also understand the problem statement, you can get more and more visibility. So the people bit of it is a tough one to deal with. Second thing is, what about the amount of money that's required, for you to actually set up these controls and actually operationalize these controls and actually get the whole thing going. So it is not about one CISO; it's an army of people that the power grid needs to have. Then there is a huge set of service providers who need to actually come together to actually deliver this. So operationalization of this is going to be a tough one. When I read through the policy, a lot of alarm bells were ringing. But as a consultant, you also tend to keep seeing opportunities, for us to actually go and provide our services or provide our consulting prowess to the sector. So, in a nutshell, if you want to look at it, it's a tough one to operationalize. It is going to take its own sweet time, but the policy seems to be tough in the sense that they mean business. The policy definitely means business. So how well it can be operationalized, it may be different from entity to entity, from sector to sector. That is something that needs to be analyzed. This cannot happen without a full-blown sponsorship from the board and them having enough budgets for them to be able to actually deploy the kind of controls that needs to be deployed. They might have some controls which would not, there would be a lot of inadequacy and insufficiency of controls at this particular point of time. So for you to close that gap itself, you would need to do a good bit of analysis. And then, you are going to go into the market to source, and the sourcing is going to be based on other government guidelines. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. And then there is a huge amount of change management window that you need to deal with. Change is not an easy thing in the power sector, dealing with change, right? So, yeah, it's a tough one to operationalize, Shipra. Very tough one.
So while on paper, it has all the right ingredients, it has all the right guidelines, mentioned. it's a checklist which ticks all the requirements, but when it comes to operationalizing, that is where probably the challenge will be for the power sector. Now, since a lot rests on the shoulder of the CISOs here. So we spoke about the challenges that you enforce being faced. So to wrap up, any best practices or any suggestions that you would have for the CISOs in the power sector as to how they can address some of these gaps and challenges that you mentioned?
It's all about, I mean, the first thing that one needs to do is baseline where they stand and baseline the gaps against the policy, because it's important for us to understand, what are the gaps, where do I stand today, and what is my target if I have to be completely in compliance with the policy. What are the 10 things or 25 different things that I need to do? Because a lot of these controls are not a one-time deployment controls. These are controls that you are going to design, architect, and operationalize. Once you operationalize, the sustenance of those controls over a period of time, and having the ability to take in the changes that happens on the sector and the grid is what is going to matter. So it's absolutely critical, without boiling the ocean, to first of all just sit down and actually do a proper comprehensive gap analysis, which is probably the step number one. But before that, one of the first things that needs to be done is identifying the right person as the CISO. Because this is, in my little world, CISO is not something which is very prevalent as a role in the power sector. Okay, not that they're not
Absolutely, yeah.
there, but probably it doesn't have the importance, it doesn't have the sponsorship, it doesn't have the right kind of skills and competence, for them to drive it. So that's problem number one. Once you have crossed that hurdle, do a gap analysis, a comprehensive gap analysis, before even thinking of what are the next steps that we need to do. Because you don't know what can you chew today, what needs to be thought of, what approvals needs to come through, how much of procurement process you need to kick through, and who are the various different actors who will come into play based on the gaps. So there's lots to be done. So my familiar term is one step at a time. It's always one step at a time. So we need to just do a gap analysis and really baseline for ourselves as to where we stand and where we ought to go. And that's the only way to deal with this, Shipra.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, it's a long way ahead, but the right start has been made. The start in the right direction has been made with the policy, and as you said, one step at a time should be the approach. And thanks a lot for those guidance, because the idea of this interview is not just to talk about what's wrong or what are the challenges, but also to give some answers to those questions and those challenges. So thank you so much, Murali, for your time. It was absolutely fantastic talking to you.
My pleasure, Shipra. My pleasure, Shipra. As you really rightly said, this is definitely one very good step in the right direction. But every CISO out there needs to think that this is just the first step in the journey, and the journey is long and it's arduous. This is not a fix for all the cyber issues out there in the grid, but a fantastic start. I must really congratulate the CA, the folks who are responsible to bring out well articulated. They have taken the best of everything, and the challenge is in operationalizing this. And that's the one that we would need to think about as we move forward. Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you so much, Murali. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Shipra. Thank you.